Hi, my name is Juliet Selgren, and this is my podcast, The Great Antidote. This podcast has been brought to you by the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. To learn more, visit www.thecgo.org. Today, I'm very excited to talk with Brent Skorup. This is going to be a very fun episode where we talk about the future, the near future, with flying cars and drones that deliver your pizza and meatball subs. That is, if government regulations don't get too much in the way. Brent is the guy with the vision and a plan to make it happen. He is a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Welcome.
Julia, thank you for having me.
Before we start, I wanted to ask you a question that I ask all my guests. What is the most important thing that people my age or in my generation should know that we don't?
I think there's an aphorism that really stuck out to me when I heard it actually on a podcast a few years ago that I wish I'd heard earlier in life, and it's comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think particularly for younger people. I remember when I was in high school and college. You're kind of put in these artificial environments where everyone is a lot like you, all the same age, and comparison has its role, but too often, I know for me, you can get unhappy in comparing yourself to siblings and classmates and athletic competitors and so forth, and it's something I've taken to heart, and I find I'm much happier. I think people are much happier when they're not doing this constant comparison and score, keeping track of the score between people.
That's a really good response. I think that's something good that I should probably keep in mind more often, especially like with college admissions and stuff coming up. That's a big thing because it's kind of like one big comparison, I guess. But if you don't think of it that way, then I don't know. I think it's just very helpful in like a lot of aspects of life. So let's jump in and start with drones. So in late 2016, Domino's was the first company to get to try doing pizza delivery via drone. They used a Nevada-based company called Flirty, and they started in New Zealand, I think. So the delivery system hasn't expanded to the rest of the world yet, but people believe, and I believe, that it's only a matter of time. But delivering pizza certainly isn't all that drones have to offer. I mean, Flirty says in its mission statement, quote, "Our mission is to save lives and improve lifestyles by making instant delivery instant for everyone. We are the first drone delivery service in the world, and we're pioneering an industry, not just a company," end quote. You were the first, not the first, but you were one of the very early advocates for drones. Can you explain what you find so exciting about this new technology?
Yeah, there's a few things that I find exciting. I mean, one is the fact that it's emerging technology, and I work on technology policy, and this is an area where I see a lot of potential. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of excitement right now. And for my part, there aren't too many researchers and policy analysts working in this area. And so, I've seen an opportunity to kind of carve out a niche for myself. So that's one element, but also, what is driving my interest and a lot of the investors in the companies in this area are some of the potential social changes and social benefits you could see from drone delivery. And You mentioned pizza delivery and retail delivery, and that would be great in itself. But there are companies doing medical deliveries in a big way, and partly in response to the COVID-19 crisis. You've seen national regulators allow more medical delivery. So, for instance, in China, kind of the heart of the COVID-19 crisis, the regulators there allowed more medical drone deliveries, and a company called SF Express, which is kind of the UPS of China, made reportedly 11 tons worth of medical deliveries within a few weeks of PPE and COVID-19 testing and other emergency supplies. There's a company, a U.S. company called Zipline. They've been operating in Rwanda and Ghana for about 5 years now, and they've made tens of thousands of deliveries, over 40,000 in those two countries, and these are medical deliveries, long distance, autonomous medical drone deliveries. So the technology is rapidly improving. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn some of this. You haven't seen quite as much in the U.S., and there's a lot of reasons for that I expect we'll get into. But the technology is up about ready, and so this is why you're seeing the investment. This is why you're seeing increasingly state and federal officials get interested in this area. And there are benefits, medical delivery, but also uh, things like utility line inspections, rail inspections, photography, real estate photography, and the technology is now getting to the point where this can be affordable for small companies and even hobbyists.
I mean, yeah, that sounds like there's a lot more, especially more than I was aware of, in just changes in the industry and kind of innovations and advances. But in the US, there's a lot of new stuff coming up, a lot of companies beginning to embrace this technology. Like Alphabet ran their first drone pilot to they ran a pilot to deliver packages for FedEx and Walgreens in Virginia. And Amazon and UPS are soon starting their own trials. And New York just approved this corridor, this 50-mile drone flight corridor in the state, which is kind of a test to see how it's going to work. And it's only a test, though. I mean, you've talked about how there have already been so many innovations and stuff, and so many places where these technologies are being put to use in like medical like fields and stuff and delivery. But in the US, we're just starting to test it out, and it would have been much more helpful if it had already been developed and we could have used it like at the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown. It would have been very helpful. So why isn't it as developed in the US and just around the world? Why isn't it as developed as it could be?
Yeah, I think there are several reasons, as you might expect in any industry. I think there's a few reasons, and some of it is regulatory. This drone regulation, airspace regulation, is dominated by the Federal Aviation Administration, which regulates traditional airlines. They prioritize safety above all else, which Congress instructs them to do, which I'm sure we all agree with. Safety in the air should be the primary goal. Um, However, that results in a very cautious attitude, and I would say excessively cautious attitude to a new technology, a new industry like this, sharing airspace, particularly in urban areas. Um, and the FAA, it's not the bad guy. There are champions for the drone industry within the FAA, but they have a lot of constituencies. They've got traditional airlines, they've got airport, they have Congress, they have cities. They're just pulled in a lot of different directions, and so you have this stagnation and this slow action at the FAA. So I think this stasis problem is the biggest problem on the regulatory side, just the status
Hmm.
quo bias. But there are other obstacles to widespread drone delivery service that aren't because of FAA cautiousness. It's you've got issues like America's a litigious society. People sue a lot, and for small companies, if you're facing the threat of, say, a nuisance or a trespass lawsuit, or a lawsuit from a state government, that really inhibits your ability to offer a new service. And this is a real threat to the industry. It's just litigation. Um, another another problem for the U.S. that other countries don't face is that some of the FAA's cautiousness is the fact that the United States has a huge amount of airports, small municipal airports. I think there are 15,000 throughout the United States. No other country has that number of small airports, and so the FAA has to make sure that existing aviation users are protected and have their voices heard. So this is all on the public policy side, and then you of course you have just financing and COVID and economic response. You've got kind of business and demand issues as well. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. I mean, this industry has a lot of potential. There's a lot of investment. There's a lot of action, but um, there are obstacles in the way, of course. And my goal as someone working in policy and law is that policy and law and regulation are not the reason that this industry has problems. If there are problems, it should be on the commercial side.
Hmm. So, what are the biggest fears that people have in regards to drones? I know that there are worries about plane crashes in relation to drones, but what are other fears?
For a long time, especially 10 years ago, I think this is dissipating, but drones, when people thought of drones, they thought of military drones, because that's where they're most frequently used. I think that's going away. I think over the years, people have become acclimated to the idea of hobbyist drones and small drones and delivery drones. But there is still some of that sense that this is, a weapon. Um, another issue. Every time I give a public talk at a university or law school, it comes up. So I know this is a frequent concern, which is privacy. When people think of drones flying low altitude airspace or making deliveries, they think of the privacy risks as well, and and it's a real concern. I think there are reasons to not be all that concerned about it. We have voyeurism laws and anti peeping tom laws and other restrictions on what people can do on our private property. Um, so I'm not that concerned about it. I hope in time that those concerns will go away. And you see states acting when states and local governments do act for drones. It's often responding to these privacy issues, and so states are acting, and I think mostly in a beneficial way. Um, and then I would say the final big concern for members of the public that I've found are noise concerns. Um, drones, particularly the large drones, can be quite noisy. It can be an annoying sound, and I think litigation over nuisance and noise concerns could be a threat to the industry.
do you think that we're just gonna have to? But aren't there laws that like you can have a certain amount of noise? Maybe if there was like a restriction, well, because you can't make a certain amount of noise past a certain hour in a lot of places. So wouldn't that protect those concerns? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. There are these kind of curfew hours and hours of day operations. Even for traditional airlines, they can only operate at certain hours of the day because of the noise. So yeah, we'll get there in time. It's just this is a new industry with kind of uh, novel issues for um, increasingly local concerns. So I think we'll get there, um, but right now, not too many states and cities have uh, have responded. But you're right. We do have existing laws and existing policies that would cover drones as well.
So I know that your colleague Adam Thier is a big supporter. Well, actually, he like writes books about it, so he's very about permissionless innovation, which is a regulatory regime where creators of new technologies and new things don't have to seek out the blessing of regulators who are skeptical, risk averse, out of touch, and they can just create what they want, what they think is needed or wanted in society. But what we have in America and around the world is a regulatory regime where everyone is cautious, where regulators always go about it in the most cautious way. They use any sort of low probability worst case scenario to kind of block out potential for new technologies and to kind of stifle technological developments. Do you think that permissionless innovation should apply to drones or in any extent, like to some extent, all the way? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's and Adam is a mentor and a friend, and yeah, I really his framework has made a big impression on me and many working in these areas. This idea that instead of a default answer to a new technology being no, the default answer should be yes, and if there are problems, we should react to those problems in a targeted, narrow way once any issues arise. And so I agree. I like that framework. I think it makes sense here. Um, obviously with aviation and just the safety concerns of the public and of regulators, it requires a very targeted response. And what I've tried to do in my work is how do we get to the answer being yes to drone companies? Because too often the default answer is no. And what I've proposed so that state, local, and federal officials can say yes to drone companies is this idea of creating drone highways throughout communities and states, and these are aerial corridors, 50 to 200 feet in the air above public roads, so you're not flying above private property, and you can get away from those issues. Um, and you're also staying away. These are demarcated away from sensitive locations like airports and schools and jails and this sort of thing. And so this is my attempt at um, showing state, federal, and local officials how they can embrace permissionless innovation in this area, which is open up these millions of miles of drone corridors that I think are out there that I think we could demarcate that don't pose much of a risk to anybody. And so that's how I've tried to incorporate that permissionless innovation framework into the work I do in this area.
You wrote a paper a few months ago where you ranked states based on their readiness to get drone technology into American skies. And you did talk about the air corridors over public roads as a way to bring new services and technologies to residents in a safe way. So, can you tell us the best and worst states when it comes to regulation of drones?
Yeah, as you said, my colleague Connor Hayland and I put out this 50 state report card of states and their drone readiness, and a big factor of how we scored states. Just briefly, some of the factors um, was a big one was this idea of drone corridors, of creating aerial corridors, and I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that many states, I think 21 states, allow state Department of Transportation or local officials to lease airspace above public roads. These laws are often decades old. They were made for real estate, for leasing airspace above highways for real estate, but nothing in these state laws would preclude leasing this to drone companies. So we highlight that. Um, Another factor for states is whether they have a drone advisory committee or some sort of task force working on drone policy. Some states have this, and so they get a higher ranking if they do that because they'll be better positioned to have a drone industry. Looked at Axios had a report about drone jobs throughout the nation, and so we incorporate that database into our score. And so we ranked all 50 states, and trying to remember off the top of my head. So North Dakota came on top, and actually for those working in the drone industry, it's probably not too surprising. North Dakota is known as being an innovator in this area. They're participating in one of the federal pilot programs for drones, and they're doing a lot of good work. Some other states near the top: Arkansas, Vermont, Texas, California, North Carolina, Oklahoma. I think that's most of the top 10 that under our scorecard are doing well and are well positioned for a drone industry. Near the bottom, I don't want I don't want to call out states too much because this is a very new industry for everyone, and I don't think there's any shame in being low score at this point. But
Mhm.
it tended to be states in the southeast. I'm not sure exactly why, but it tended to be some states in the southeast.
That's interesting. So, I want to kind of shift gears and talk about cars, driverless and flying cars. So, my first question is kind of similar to a question I asked about drones, which is the fact that driverless cars could improve and save so many lives. So, why aren't we more advanced in implementing them in our society? I mean, I know there's like a lot there. There are a lot of like safety concerns and things that have to happen. Like roads need to be fitted with sensors and stuff like that. And that might be difficult to do. So, can you talk about what needs to happen both on the technology side and on the regulatory side before we can see driverless cars on our roads?
Yeah, driverless cars, much more than drones, I would say. They have technological issues that need to be solved before they can be a mass service. Whereas drones, there are fairly extensive uh, drone delivery services today and drone services today. Autonomous vehicles on the roads, um, they, for a lot of reasons, they're just not at the point where we can have mass deployment. And the companies will tell you this that they're just not ready for widespread deployment. And the reason for that, I think it's simply a matter of the fact that we have tens of millions of vehicles on public roads, and that's where self driving cars will be. Whereas in low altitude airspace, it's essentially clean. I mean, there's with a few exceptions of some helicopter trips and so forth, low altitude airspace is almost totally clean. So you can have um, a fairly basic autonomous system can do the straight line flights for drones, but obviously with vehicles on the roads, you're dealing with a very complex area. Um, you've got other cars, you've got drunk drivers, you've got children running around, you've got animals running around, and self-driving vehicle systems have to be prepared for all of these very complex and very rare circumstances, and there's just nothing like it when you're in low altitude airspace. Um, so I think I'm excited by the potential of autonomous vehicles on the roads. I think in the short term, there's a company called Neuro. There's probably some other companies doing this, but they're making small, basically golf cart sized autonomous vehicles that do grocery deliveries. And the benefit of doing something like that is you're on residential roads, you're at low speeds, the risk to others is fairly small, um,
Mhm.
and because of the weight of the vehicle and the slow speeds, and you don't have passengers, so that removes another risk. And actually, this company Neuro received federal regulators eased some restrictions on their vehicles so they could deploy more on public roads, and people and regulators more comfortable with that sort of thing. And so that's where I see a lot of the action going, and I hope in time people will gain comfort with this. Companies will improve their autonomous systems, um, and that will scale up to passenger vehicles. As you probably know, the we have a public health crisis on our roads. 35,000 people
Mhm.
die every year. Thousands of these are because of drunk and distracted drivers, um, and that's it's this health crisis that autonomous vehicles will help mitigate. And so I hope we'll get to the point where we can have mass autonomous self-driving vehicles on roads. But um, and there are small pilot programs throughout the nation, um, but the mass service I think will take a while.
Do you think that having driverless cars on the road will require all cars to be driverless or the majority, or do you think that we can have a mix of both? Or will that still be some sort of safety concern because of like the unpredictability of drivers?
Yeah, this is an ongoing debate in self-driving car circles. I think we could have a mix, and I think we will have a mix for a while. My own hunch is that it will happen slowly and then very quickly at some point. I don't know when that will be, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but I think somewhere in there will be this switch. Just uh, you know, people don't like driving, having to be on alert at all times, and having that mental load. And so I think people will switch at some point and fairly quickly once this technology is ready. And I think it will be rapid. The insurance cost alone, uh, you know, personal drivers won't need insurance anymore. That will be on the car company or the shared vehicle company. And so I think there'll be economic benefits as well. A few months ago, I looked at just the cost of owning a car, and according to AAA, I think it's about $9,000 a year, the cost of owning a car. And if you could go to a leasing framework or um, uh, a shared vehicle framework, it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. Um, but I think, in short, I think we'll have mixed, but I think it'll rapidly move towards mostly autonomous. I think we'll always have some drivers out there. I'm thinking of trucks and contractors and other kind of uh, niche services, but I think a lot of it can switch to self-driving in time.
Let's talk about flying cars. Kind of similar, kind of different. In the Wall Street Journal, you wrote, quote, "Futurists have been promising us flying cars since the late 19th century. They may be about to arrive. City dwellers in the next decade could fly from Lower Manhattan to John F. Kennedy International Airport in less than 10 minutes. Chicago families could escape the summer heat and shuttle above Lake Michigan to Indiana beaches in less than half an hour. These trips often take an hour or two on the ground, but electric air taxis will allow for speedy urban travel without the headaches of flying coach." End quote. To me, I think that's pretty awesome. It sounds great. So, can you make your case for flying cars?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we're seeing in small drones, we're also seeing in passenger drones or flying. They go by various names: flying cars or eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing, urban air mobility. There's all these names, but I'll call them passenger drones. Um, uh, there's You're seeing with autonomous systems. You're seeing with new ways of manufacturing aircraft. You're seeing with electric, with battery improvements and hydrogen fuel improvements. This kind of new interest and new investment into passenger drones, which would carry between one and five passengers usually. Um, and there's some exciting developments, and quite frankly, there's one company that kind of leads the world, I would say, um, and it's a company called EHang, and they're in China, um, and they've been flying employees and journalists and politicians and others for over a year now in their two passenger autonomous drone. They expect later this year to open up autonomous drone um, sightseeing tour in China, in southern China, and they're working with some European nations to begin cargo and passenger flights. So this is not science fiction anymore. There are companies working on this, and it's not just EHang, but they've kind of led the way to this point. You've got companies like Uber, Airbus, Boeing, these kind of known global leaders also working in this area. And so I think for a lot of the reasons that drone technology has moved so quickly, I think passenger drones will surprise a lot of people in how quickly they come into service.
That sounds like so many different countries around the world have so much, like, so much, I don't know, presence compared to the US at least. I mean, you wrote, quote, "Bottlenecks for the US air taxi industry are now due to federal and state regulations, not the technology." End quote. So, in the US, what would need to happen for us to have the same sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, and yeah, I might sound harsh on the U.S. I should add the U.S. is leading in a lot of ways. We have our 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 VC community, our investment community in technology is the envy of the world, and that gives us a huge head start. Um, where we probably lag somewhat is just gaining permission to uh, allow these companies to test and to fly and access to airspace. This is changing actually in the last few months. Uh, the 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 Trump administration, including the military, have made this a priority. I think some of this is this kind of friendly competition, or not so friendly, but hopefully friendly competition with China. A lot of the drone industry, the small drone industry, went to China, and U.S. leaders want to bring the passenger drone industry to the United States, and so they're making efforts to do this in some ways that I think are really beneficial, like giving passenger drone companies access to military airspace to do testing. Um, and so the U.S. In some way we lag, and in some way it's kind of natural, just because, as I said, we have 15,000 municipal airports and 5,000 commercial airports, and that just means we just don't have the clean airspace that a lot of other countries do to do the testing and to allow these new services. But I think we will catch up. I think we're seeing signs that, from the government and the private sector, that the U.S. will quickly get up to speed. But the fact of the matter is, we do have a very cautious, and I would say an overcautious system, and time will tell if we'll accelerate things. But right now, it doesn't look good, frankly.
If you had to give us a rough estimate of when you think that these technologies will be kind of present, out of their testing phase and actually being used in American society, when would you say that we would have drones and driverless cars and flying cars?
So drones, self-driving cars, and flying cars. So drones, I I hope within 2 years we'll have kind of a mass drone delivery service of some kind. There are drone services that are a mass service, things like utility inspections and photography, um, even agriculture spraying, which has been going on in Japan for 20 years with drones. Um, but when it comes to delivery, I hope within 2 years we'll have mass service. Um, Self-driving cars, that's a harder one. I hope within 10 years. I think it's realistic within 10 years to have a mass self-driving vehicle service. Um, for passenger drones, I think there's two segments. There's kind of autonomous freight delivery, and I think that could happen within 2 years. You're already seeing some of it around the world. Um, and the company Ehang I mentioned, the Chinese company that's doing passenger drones, they've according to their um, according to their company reports, they sold 60 of their passenger drones, probably for freight delivery, but they sold 60 last year, and they have orders for 1,000 more that they're working on fulfilling. So I think freight delivery is almost there to being uh, a mass drone service. Passenger, it will take a while. A widespread passenger, especially in the United States, with just given the things I pointed out before, we just have a cautious system. But I think in other countries, I think within 5 years, it depends what you mean by mass service, but I would say, available to members of the public. I could I I hope and expect there'll be some services within 5 years.
That that would be great. That's kind of soon. I don't know, that makes me excited. So, finally, what is one thing that you believed at one time in your life that you later changed your position on, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not related to technology or anything, but I would say my views on healthcare have probably changed, and um, I don't think it's news to anybody that we have a very dysfunctional system in the United States, and I've come around to I think something like the Canadian model I think could work better than our current system, which um, there are debates. Do we have a market system? Do we have is there too much government intervention into our system? The fact of the matter is, Mercatus put out a paper a couple years ago. Consumers are only paying for about 11% of their healthcare spending, almost almost 90% is third-party payment, either insurance companies or government. This is not a market system, and I think in a lot of ways going to a more Canadian style system um, could be beneficial. But I say that very tentatively. I'm not a healthcare expert, but my views have changed on healthcare over the years.
What is the Canadian system like?
As I understand it, there's a it's a universal system. There's a lot of government funding for and support for basic services. I think about 70% of spending is from government payments, and about 30%, I think, mostly surgeries and other things are privately uh, uh, provided. Um, but it's a unique system. It's a very federal system. I think a lot of delegate the central government has delegated a lot of authority to the provincial governments, and I think there's some wisdom in that model. But again, I'm not a healthcare expert. Take it with a grain of salt.
I mean, that's definitely something I want to look into. I've always been like thinking about like I don't know, I need to take the time to look into that because it's something I'm definitely interested in finding out more about and trying to figure out for myself like if I could like I mean, a lot of people have tried to come up with systems that they think would work and they I don't know, either don't or they do and it's just similar or like nothing happens. I don't know. I've always been like, well, if I tried to think about it, what would happen? I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
but yeah,
well,
I should say, in my own brief interactions with the healthcare system, I've been fortunate to be healthy, but it's extremely painful to deal with insurance and medical providers and all this, um, and when even savvy people are having huge difficulties, uh, I think it's a nightmare for everyone. And some of this, yeah, I should say, my wife's a veterinarian, and so I can kind of see a kind of parallel system of private healthcare provision, which is animal healthcare.
mhm.
And there's a lot to like about that system. They have much lower costs. It's a much simpler system, but there are issues, particularly with non-payment for expensive services, that I think would be much worse when it comes to human medicine. That I just don't see a good private solution for. Um, and and so yeah, my own interactions with the public healthcare system and kind of a peek into veterinary medicine has made me more open to alternative ways of funding healthcare.
I mean, that is a good point that when it's difficult to figure out, even if you're usually good at figuring out stuff like that, that's a point where you need to take a step back and think like, why is this not working? Why is it so difficult? It should not be a painful, difficult thing. And also, it's kind of interesting. I never thought about comparing it to kind of the animal realm of health because I don't know. I feel like that's kind of cool. Like I feel like we could learn something there. And I mean, you say you have, so I'm definitely going to look into it. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I'm excited for the future and for all the new technologies that we have to see and to kind of begin to adapt into our lives and stuff. So, thank you so much.
Julia, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, of course.